Welcome back, people of the pod, to season 3, episode 5 of Office Hours with Karpf and Loge. As always, I am Peter Loge, an associate professor in the School of Media and Public Affairs at the George Washington University and a strategic consultant. And I am joined, as I am really, honestly, constantly, to the level of annoyance, by
Dave Karpf, also an associate professor in the School of Media and Public Affairs at George Washington University. It's time to tell them I have been secretly living in your attic without your permission, just to scare you at night. In the middle of the night, I just make snarky, quiet comments so that they percolate into your dreams. How have you not noticed this yet?
That does explain a lot. The only tricky part is, of course, I don't have an attic, but that's fine. That's fine.
That you know of.
I know of. We had one secretly installed. We had one of those secret rooms. I have wondered about people with secret rooms in their houses, and I just kind of wonder, like, how does nobody notice that the house is narrower? How do you like hide an entire room without somebody thinking this room is really narrow?
Did I ever tell you about the plans I have for building a lair in my house?
No.
Our listeners need to know this. Yeah. So there's a tiny hideaway space that you can reach behind the fridge of my house, basically for storage. It's under the stairway. But there's if you were to build a basement, that's actually where you would build it. So the dream here, which we will not do because it would cost far more money than I have. And also I like to come up with bits. I don't actually have the energy to go through with them. But the idea is we build a basement and the way to access it is behind the fridge. And maybe we build in a bookcase with a false book that you pull out and move back. There's the possibility for a secret passageway that would then lead down to a basement, which in that case is clearly a lair and not a basement. All I would need is a lot more money and time than I have, and I can have a lair. Just like you have an attic that I live in and you don't know about.
I have a lot of questions about what you would do with a lair. I don't know that I want to go into them now. I feel like that's between you and your therapist. And it's not that kind of a podcast. So let's get...
Look, so some white men will start a podcast rather than going to therapy.
That's why I teach. All right, some logistics before we get into it. We are recording a day late because apparently
my kid has the flu. Because my kid has the flu and I had to parent yesterday. So we're a day late. It's fine. Everyone's sick.
Had to parent. We also are not going to be recording in 2 weeks because normally we would record on Tuesday. The next episode would record on election day, which seems like a dumb day to record about what's about to happen in the election because by the time we say it will have already happened. And we're not going to record a day late because honestly, the airwaves are going to be full of people like me and Dave saying, see, I told you so. And nobody needs that. So we're going to wait probably a week afterwards and see if we can sort our way through the mess. I think those are the logistics.
I do think it would be entertaining if 2 strategic communication professors were like, you know what would be strategic is recording our political podcast on election day to come out the day after the election. That'll be useful and current. So yeah, we're waiting a week so that we can have better things, to more insightful things to share with our audience.
Hopefully. Also, thanks as always to Alana, our producer. Thank you to the fans. I do want to point out that we did have somebody review us on Apple and say, by my podcast from my favorite professor and Dave Karpf.
Which hurt me so much. And all I want now, listeners, is for somebody to write a review where they say, this is a great podcast from the professor who taught me political communication ethics and Peter Loge.
But
Stratcom alumni, you know what I'm talking about. Let's hear some Malinsky.
That's just No. Okay, one. Now this is kind of sad. That's just kind of sad at this point.
You don't need any political communication ethics beyond Alinsky. It's all right there.
You don't need any political communication. No. So many reasons that's wrong. But that's a different podcast. You see, we're teeing up seasons 11 through 17 if we can only get the sponsors. And if we get a really good sponsor, we can get someone to build your lair. We need to get syndicated. We need Pod Save America money for you to build your lair. Let's get to it. We're boring the people, Dave.
I think it's very entertaining. Peter, what is annoying you on the internet this week?
What's annoying? So many things are annoying me on the internet this week.
Besides me.
besides you, let's talk about climate activists throwing soup at paintings.
Sure.
What are your? This is dumb. This is just dumb. Can we just take a moment to say, climate activists are throwing soup and other stuff at priceless works of art, these amazing paintings, all in an attempt to say climate change matters. And I think the main upstart of this, the main result of all of this is going to be they are raising everybody's awareness of how poorly protected priceless works of art are, and the need to drastically and immediately act to protect museums and priceless works of art. I think the people who are most happy about this, who are going to benefit the most from this, are, of course, people who provide museum security, who are making insane bank about walking to museums and going, hey, have you thought about the kids and their soup? We got to protect some more paintings. For a cool $1 million, I will put up a baked beans-free screen in front of Starry Night. This is not like Joe Manchin is watching this thinking, wow, there's a Van Gogh that's at risk. Now, that's what's going to get me to act on coal. Because the people of West Virginia have been crying out for a greater appreciation of Matisse and what happens when you unironically throw Campbell soup cans at them.
So what I'm hearing from you is that you care more about art than the planet, right?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, so look, as an old climate activist, I agree with you.
Hang on.
Yikes, I know.
Can you amplify that, Alana? Is there a way we can maybe get some and is there a thing we can do? Go ahead, Dave. I'm sorry, I cut you off after you said I was right. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
3 seasons to find a thing you're right about. Yeah, so this happened again this weekend. This is now, I think, 2 weeks in a row that some radical European climate activists have entered a museum and thrown soup onto a painting. And there was a big Twitter debate when it happened 2 weeks ago where people were debating whether or not this is an effective tactic, because on the one hand, they are breaking through the malaise and forcing a conversation about climate. And on the other hand, the conversation they're forcing is, look at this fucking tactic, let's all argue about it. And as Stratcom guys, I think we can kind of weigh in here and say, if the thing that your tactic does is get everybody to argue about whether it was useful that you were annoying or not, that's at least not the best. And what particularly stands out to me is, I could see a defense of it if the museum itself was the decision maker, and what you're doing is showing the things you value are going to be at risk unless you make the right decision, particularly if that decision is coming up in 2 weeks or in some other way. This is a threat that matters a lot more to the people on the inside than the people on the outside. Or if we were coming up on some big international decision, no one was paying any attention, and this is how we're grabbing attention. What stands out to me is, at best, you're forcing a national conversation that's going to last for a moment and lead to resentment and not much else, right? Okay, well, two weekends ago, you threw soup on a painting, everybody yelled about it. This weekend you did it again. Fewer people are yelling about it. Mostly they're just rolling eyes and being like, I guess, like you said, I guess we're going to up the museum security now. This isn't a tactic that builds to anything except people being furious at you, people finding you pretty self-righteous, and more spending on museum security. So if it doesn't build to your broader campaign strategy, then really just don't do it. Just
right. I mean, that's the key, right? It's completely disconnected.
Yeah.
Right. If ExxonMobil were sponsoring the exhibit, you can say, look, this is blood money. If there's some connection, but there's no connection between the Tate and, European climate goals. There's no, it's simply, hey, look at us. Now that we've got your attention, let's talk about climate, which is it's profoundly irritating. And the people who care the most about these art at the Tate and who are most in favor of supporting the art at the Tate are probably mostly on your side, right? It's like raising the awareness of people who already care about Van Gogh, about the upcoming climate apocalypse. Dude, they know.
I don't know how many of them are actually on their side. I don't know how many are on their side, and I think I heard that at least one of these was funded by was funded by a gas company, or was a gas company event.
But if you have to, if you have to struggle for it, though, then you're missing the point. It's got to be clear. It's got to be front of mind. This to that. This to that.
Right. Because otherwise, the national conversation that you're setting up is one where basically people who lightly agree with you say like, yeah, but also maybe throw those activists like, yes, the world is burning, but also maybe you throw those young activists in jail, which isn't, it's not leading to any, like, we don't just need public awareness. It's 2022. We need action. I totally understand young activists freaking out and saying we need to do things that are more bold and aggressive because action isn't happening. But if those things don't build into something bigger, then like, sure, go radical, but also like go radical in ways that build. And this just doesn't build, so don't do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're in full agreement. We're in full agreement. This is it. It took 5 seasons and 3 seasons, 5 episodes.
We have been in agreement
minutes.
before because I've made stunning points that you have said, Dave, you're right. But okay, we can keep on going.
Speaking of Dave, you're right. I think the running joke of this podcast has been Elon Musk and Twitter. Like, do we have to fold tents and go home now that Elon Musk appears to be actually buying Twitter?
Okay, so yeah, we're recording this on Wednesday. All signals are that he is actually going to own Twitter on Friday. I am unhappy.
For a change?
Right, really. Way off brand for you, Dave.
It's Wednesday. Of course you're unhappy.
So I do want to spell out, I do not think everyone is going to abandon Twitter next week. I'm not going to. I think most people won't. What I expect is going to happen is that over the next 6 months to a year, Twitter is going to fall to shit. The reason it's going to fall to shit is, first of all, Elon doesn't know what he's doing. Second of all, not only is he spending 44 billion on this, but that includes, since there's debt financing, they have to make an extra, I think it's 1.2 or 1.7 billion dollars a year just to pay the interest on the loans that he's taking out, which means that Elon Musk is going to fire a lot of staff, which makes the product less usable, and he's going to try like 1,000 different harebrained monetization schemes, all of which make the service shittier. So it's not that overnight everyone's going to say, you know, how dare you, we won't be on this service if Elon owns it. It's that the service is going to turn to shit. And then people are going to find somewhere else. Now, honestly, like I made this joke last night on Twitter, but like, of course, on Twitter, that's where I spend my time. I made this joke that like 10, 20 years from now, when we look back on the Twitter era, I hope we will all agree that the funniest way for Twitter to end is for Elon Musk and his billionaire buddies to spend 44 billion burning it to the ground. Like, that's going to be hilarious when we look back on it. And what's really like, everyone's going to be able to move to something else. Like, eventually something else will emerge and everyone will be fine there. Really, the people who are worst off are the people who have way too large of a following on Twitter because that one time that they happen to get Twitter famous because they followed Brett Stevens. Like, I'm not going to have 40,000 followers on whatever comes next. So like, oh, well, like that's too bad for me. But the rest of us are going to be fine. We're going to be able to laugh at the billionaires. We're going to realize that the billionaires don't have everything figured out. Like, Elon doesn't have magic dust that can make Twitter profitable. He's just rich, and so we take him too seriously. So like it's gonna be a mess, and it's gonna be a shame because I do like the service, and it's, you know, gone well for me. But yeah, it's all gonna come apart because like, oh my God, Elon is actually buying Twitter for 44 billion. What an idiot! This is gonna go poorly.
I think the New York Times, I get the New York Times morning newsletter update, and they did a good, I thought, analysis of social media, what's going on with Twitter, and then Meta/Facebook. Look, we've got legs.org. I don't know what the hell it is now. Their stuff, but then also the emerging social media sites, Parler, which I believe Parler might have fewer followers than you do.
It might, and also Kanye West is deciding to buy it. They can all be anti-Semites. I'm not calling him Yay because of the things that he calls me and people of my faith. Fuck.
There we go. So he's apparently, and he's also losing money. I mean, Adidas has dropped down. Corporate sponsors are abandoning him. But you've got Parler, you've got, I don't know, all the right-wing sites with their relative handful of followers. Mm-hmm. You know, then you've got, TikTok is doing exceptionally well, but that's running into problems. You've got the other side, was it MeWe? I can't remember the name of it, but it's a picture a day. Like it says, take the picture a day. Snapchat's losing money. Snapchat.
That's Be Real. MeWe is a Chinese Chinese social media site.
Okay. Yeah.
Be Real is totally different. My God, you're old.
I just don't like.
It's okay. It's okay.
I can't keep track of all of these things. I'm a
That's
bear
what
of a
I
little.
said.
I'm a bear of a little brain, Dave. I'm a bear of a little brain. At any rate, I'll try to put that in the links. All right, clock is running. The election midterm election is soon.
How are we
And
feeling?
two weeks ago, I feel kind of nauseous, but that might be, I don't know, that might be breakfast. Nope, I'm pretty sure it's the election. The a couple of weeks ago, we pointed out that the races would be getting tighter, and a lot of people will be jumping on, a lot of analysts and people will be jumping on, like saying, "Oh my gosh, Fetterman's blowing. It looked, the lead is shrinking." No, predictable things are happening. It turns out Republicans vote for Republicans, Democrats vote for Democrats. Inflation matters. It has always mattered. Crime matters. It has always mattered. Like, things are kind of going as expected, right? If you look at the long history of this kind of stuff, I'm not surprised by anything.
So that's right, but let's also let's not be hair on fire about this.
Oh no, it's bad, but it's predictably bad.
Like the circle to square here is, for 2 years, political scientists have been saying, yeah, based on the fundamentals, like in a normal campaign environment, 2022 goes really bad for Democrats. And as inflation went up, okay, yeah, and like approval ratings went down, okay, yeah, 2022 probably goes real bad for Democrats, right? Like in normal times, if things go as expected, the party in power is going to lose seats. And also the lurking question for 2 years, and particularly after Dobbs, was whether or not there is anything that is radical enough to make this not a normal election, right? Like I would say that 2 years ago, if you had said, okay, so like we're gonna have all the normal election dynamics, but also the summer beforehand, the court is gonna outright strike down Roe v. Wade, like proudly, and then do a bit of a victory lap. Will that shake anyone? I probably would have said, like, you know, I'm not sure, like either LOL, nothing matters, or yeah, that ends up reshaping things at least a bit. And what we don't know yet, because it's 2 weeks out and the narrowing in the polls is exactly what we all knew would happen. What we don't know yet is whether or not in voter turnout, because these polls, that's based on likely voter models and who answers the phones and how we model it. So like there's a lot of question marks there. But the perennial question of, okay, now it's down to turnout. Is turnout going to look like it has every other cycle? Because like, while 2022 is an emergency, like 2018 was as well. So like, is turnout higher now than it was in 2018 when like Trump and the Republicans ran everything and had kids in cages? Like that's an active question. And if it isn't surprisingly high, if everything goes according to expectations, then the lesson for the court is going to be, oh, actually, we can just make shit up as we go. There will be no price for our party. And the lesson for the Republican Party will be, we can tank the economy. We can like spend the next 2 years having Hunter Biden hearings. Like we can make everything a complete farce, because even when you strike down Roe, it doesn't end up really mattering 6 months later. So like the test that we are at the event horizon now, we don't know what's on the other side, but the test right now is whether or not the sheer audacity of their anti-democratic activities leads to different voter behavior. We're going to know when we record next. But like, if it doesn't, then that increases the likelihood of the fall of American democracy pretty heavily. Like we kind of need to shoot the moon here in order to keep imperfect American democracy going. And yeah, I'm pretty nervous.
See, I mean, I'm not quite as doomy. And so, I mean, 2022 is going to go the way 2022 is going to go, right? Republicans are going to control the House. The question is by how much, right? And part of that will be driven by how many white suburban women care more about abortion and guns than they care about inflation and crime. And it's only going to take a relative handful of places to make that difference, right? This isn't America voting and all of that. We're talking about a handful of House races and a handful of places with a handful of candidates, and then candidate quality matters, turnout matters, whose ground game is better matters, that sort of thing. The Senate, similarly, right? We're looking at a handful of races and a handful of places, and it's going to come down to, you know, how white suburban women feel about guns and abortion versus inflation. And inflation, I think inflation and crime win, right? The Republican message is relatively straightforward. Democrats are in charge. Inflation, crime, and immigration are out of control.
You're right about that, but the thing I think we're leaving off of that is because of the qualities of their candidates. Like if their Secretary of State candidates aren't kidding. The independent state legislature challenge that's going before the Supreme Court right now isn't kidding. Like the likelihood that because of sort of people voting as though it's normal times, like if they elect a bunch of people who are saying like, you know what, I don't like democracy, I like fascism, put me in charge of elections, like we should take them literally and seriously. And so while you're right in terms of like what it's looking like 2 Tuesdays from now, I think we should remain pretty hair on fire that unless they're just kidding, and I'm pretty sure they're not, that means that we're going to have swing states in 2024 where the vote doesn't matter because the Secretary of State has said, I will only certify a Trump win.
Right. I mean, that's where that's the races to which people aren't paying enough attention, right? It's not the Fetterman-Oz debate where, like, of course it went the way it went.
Yeah.
But it's Arizona, right?
Mhm.
It's Secretary of State, it's a gubernatorial candidate in Arizona. It's all these down ballot races, the folks who control elections, who control election outcomes, right? And that, that now is how do local and county parties turn out the vote? How do local campaigns work? And that's not where any of the media attention is. Like there's some attention being paid to look all the election deniers on the ballot, and Arizona's getting a lot of attention because of Kerry Lake and some others. But that's the stuff that's going to matter. I think for me, the race in which I'm most interested, one of the races in which I'm most interested for big democracy observer of politics is Georgia, the Senate and the gubernatorial race, right? So if a Republican incumbent gets reelected governor, and he's come out against Trump and he didn't cave to Trump's pressure to lie about the election, he gets reelected, and Democrat Senator Warnock gets reelected and beats Trump-backed, as you and I have talked about, great football player, probably should have stayed as that. That to me sends an interesting set of signals, right? That the candidate quality matters and that it's okay to be anti-Trump conservative Republican. So I'm really, and I'm relatively optimistic about Warnock. I mean, Warnock, I don't think has ever trailed. Stacey Abrams has never even been within realistic shot of winning that race. So if the numbers hold, that I think is a little bit of a place to be a little bit optimistic, a little place to be interested. Otherwise, I think the only thing we can safely predict, absolutely predict, is we're recording this on a Wednesday. In 2 weeks, the Wednesday after the election, we will not be on the air. A lot of people like you and me will be saying, see, I told you so. Third way is going to be putting out press releases saying, see, I told you so. You nominated liberals who lost, moderates won. The progressive caucus is going to be saying, see, I told you so. All these progressives won, all these moderates lost. All the Trump people, like everybody's going to be saying, see, I told you so, which is why we're going to wait a week, come back and say, all right, well, now this dust is settled. What's the larger story here? And it could be a larger story is nothing's changed. Everything went to plan. Everything went as predicted. In 2 years is a long time from now. Let's see where inflation and the economy are. Maybe.
And I think that's right. But again, we'll address this when we meet again after the election. But I think there's going to be two ways to view what it all means. And one is for how elections go. And the other is whether we come closer or further away to being governable.
Right. I mean, that's the bigger guess.
Like I'm hair on fire primarily about we have been trending towards completely ungovernable and likely not really a democracy anymore. And again, like if we have elections, but a state party apparatus that says we'll only recognize them when we win, like there are countries that hold those, we don't call them democracies. Right. That could very well be us in 2 years. And if Republicans take the Senate and decide, well, we're going to spend the next 2 years sabotaging everything because we've decided that if we sabotage everything, Biden will just get blamed and that way Trump will get reelected. And that way his supporters won't burn us at the stake. That makes us less governable in a way that the electoral dynamics may look a lot like they did 10, 20, 30 years ago, but the governability, 10, 20 years ago, well, at least 20 years ago, if the midterm went badly for the party in power, that was not an actual crisis of governance the way that it is now.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure we don't lose that.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that which is why the Georgia races I find especially interesting. And that becomes another strategic communications question, right? How do stratcoms people work on this? And as you said repeatedly, only Republicans can fix the Republican Party. And I've said repeatedly recently on this podcast and in the press, it comes down to incentives. If Representative Cheney had won her primary going away, I'm not sure we'd be having this conversation. She did not. And that then becomes the comms piece to change the structural piece, right? Clock is running.
Yeah, just one thing on that, which is you're right about the incentives, but that also means that Trump, if the Republican Party network does not believe that like hardcore Trumpists paid a price,
right?
Then even if Kemp wins, like, okay, Kemp beat Abrams in Georgia, that's not going to signal a change in the Republican Party of, oh, you know what, like we need to be the party of Kemp instead of the party of Trump. It's only if an awful, like not just Herschel Walker, because they'll be able to excuse that. Like there's plenty of excuses for that. But like if JD Vance somehow loses, that then starts to signal that this race towards Trumpism ends up costing them. Like that ends up mattering for the small segment of the Republican Party saying we need to knock this shit off. It helps them get a little bit like marginally bigger. But if it's a good week overall in the election for the Trumpist side of the party, that's also a bad week for the segment of the party that has decided to fix the party.
Yes, absolutely. That is true. That's absolutely true, which sets up another set of comms challenges and a conversation we will continue. I'm going to change the subject.
Let's do it.
Because clock's running and these dogs can't walk forever. You know what I'm saying? I just want to tee this up. I want to put the question out there again. We're not going to have a chance to talk about it today, but we will talk about it in the future. And that is the World Cup, the Men's World Cup coming up in Qatar at the end of November, roughly 4 weeks from now, it kicks off. Qatar has a lot of human rights challenges, I think is a safe way to put it. Challenges. It's a hot mess. Thousands of people have died building this stadium and building the hotels. We talked about this last week. Grant Wall, who's one of America's most respected soccer journalists, has written about this. The Guardian has written about it. The New Republic, a number of outlets around the world have written about all of the human rights abuses and then how journalists are being treated and what journalists can do. So the question I would put out for consideration for our audience, and actually I legitimately would love some feedback on social media or email or whatever, is you've got the most popular event on the planet happening in a place that's a human rights train wreck, but is also not a democracy. Mm-hmm. How can advocates use all of this attention to change the human rights situation on the ground at Qatar? And I want to two more things before we jump in. One is there's some evidence that all the attention might already be working. According to an article in the New Republic, initially dated, I want to say in September, they wrote about all the restrictions being put on the media covering the World Cup. A lot of restrictions on journalists. A lot of journalists are actually concerned about it. Since the article was, no, I'm sorry, this is the Guardian. I'm sorry, the Guardian wrote about this in September. The Guardian wrote about the conditions on the ground. After they posted the article, Qatar made some changes. And the article, according to the article, which I'll put on peterloge.com podcast with footnotes, the article was amended on 15 October 2022 to include a response from the Qatari authorities received after publication. So some global spotlight might be having some effect. How do you amplify that? How do you make sure the effect sticks? Second question, what responsibility do sports journalists covering the World Cup have to draw attention to situation beyond the games themselves? A lot of global media outlets have said, no, we're there for the games. Grant Wall and others have said, yeah, we're there for the games primarily, but you can't simply ignore the rest of it. Third question is, one outcome of all of this might not just be on Qatar, but also on FIFA, the governing body of soccer, which is just profoundly and notoriously corrupt. Could this actually force some changes in the governing body of the most popular sport on the planet? I think these questions are legitimately interesting for advocates. Like, what do you do? You've got this huge spotlight on this huge event. with a group of people who really don't have to care.
Mhm.
So what do? Podverse, I'm asking you, Twitterverse, I'm asking you, the Project on Ethics and Political Communication, which I also run, and the Institute for Public Diplomacy and Global Communication, run by our colleague Will Humans, are going to be hosting an event with a human rights expert, a professor at Lancaster College of Pennsylvania, Grant Wall, who's the soccer journalist, and Sylvia Weisbord, who's another one of our colleagues who's an expert in threats to journalism, threats to journalists online. We'll be hosting a conversation about this in a few weeks. But I legitimately, honestly want to hear from our listeners. What do advocates do? Dave, a couple of minutes, what do advocates do?
So there's two things that I want to flag. One, as you pointed out, is there are a lot of different targets to consider here. You don't need to choose just one, but you should think about which ones matter to you, right? Like, this could be an opportunity to pressure FIFA for FIFA reforms. That matters more to the fans and supporters of the world's most popular sport than it does to people who will be living in Qatar after the games are over. You can think about, how do we try to affect the Qatari government, or like circumstances on the ground, governance there once the games are over. What stands out to me is, like, this is, I feel like one of the themes that I always bring up on this podcast is clock management. I see a sort of an interesting clock management play here, which is to try to think mostly in the medium term, right? Like, the games are coming, they are of a fixed duration. Well, there's some value in pressuring journalists to make sure they're not just covering the games, but they're covering larger contexts. Like, yes, do that. This is a spot where a broader public then would usually pay attention to human rights abuses in Qatar, will have some interest in reading long-form journalism on this. And so I think the play is probably to try to spend some real time, energy, like organizational manpower or person power on the types of journalism and exposés and reports, like, like Human Rights Watch and other groups like that, should probably be trying to use this in order to raise the level of awareness. Like, I'm actually going to kind of argue for awareness raising, but like, try to have some blockbuster report based on all the attention that's there now, that while it's not going to affect their behavior during the games, because that's sort of going to be too short, could then lead after the fact to like conversations within the UN or some other like national or cross-national or international governing bodies about the findings that came up during the World Cup that we now need to deal with in the aftermath of it. So I think you play probably to the medium term instead of the long term.
That makes a lot of sense. Amnesty is already doing that. Amnesty is also calling for an equal amount of money that FIFA gives in prizes to teams who participate to actually solving some of the other problems and human rights, frankly. So people of the pod, you know where we are, and we're about to remind you where we are. Let us know what you think. I'm going to be pushing out links to the event in a few weeks. This is a holy cow moment and a terrific opportunity, but we have to manage it smartly. So Dave, I've got one last plug before we go. There's a terrific piece in the New Yorker on lotteries, on state lotteries. And I think it's a fantastic case study in strategic communication. One of the main drivers behind state scratch-off lotteries is, unsurprisingly, the company that dominates the market for making those little pieces of cardboard with the little things that you scratch off. And because they want to sell more of their stuff. And so they're one of the driving forces behind scratch-off lotteries. It's in the New Yorker. I'll put it on peterloge.com podcast on the footnotes and also on Medium. Sent it to my students. I think it's a really interesting little piece. Dave, on the internets, where can people find you?
People can find me on Twitter, so long as it's around, is at Dave Karpf. I'm also on Substack, davekarpf.substack.com. I have a new piece that just came out today. Which is to say yesterday for listeners. Yeah, yesterday, sure. But so I published a book, The Move On Effect, 10 years ago. I reread it this summer to sort of see, like, a decade later, what holds up and sort of what new lessons can come up. I wrote the first piece related to that today. It's looking back at sort of the idea of political innovation and whether it's overrated, whether political maintenance is more important. I'm real proud of this piece. I hope people check it out. All right. And I am at PLOGE on Twitter and peterloge.com/podcast. Also Medium, always
for the footnotes. Rate us, follow us, like us, tell your friends. Sponsors like Dave's Lair isn't going to build itself. I'm just saying.
How does nobody want to pick this up when there's such golden material?
There's such golden material. There's Dave's Lair with a hidden.
The lair could be a recording studio.
Ooh. And we were told by the same fan that liked me that we need better recording equipment. So he's not wrong. He's not wrong. Thank you as always, Alana, people of the pod, Dave, and I hope everybody enjoyed the dog walk.
I'll see you after the election.